G.K. Masterson. What kind of sensory organs do you think beings native to a universe with access to six spatial temporal dimensions, we have access to 3 spatial and 1 temporal, would have? Dimensions taken from Imagine the 10th dimension. What kind of sensory organs would creatures from the 6th dimension? 6-dimensional space. Well, you know, here's what's interesting about that. There's a reset. Here's what's interesting about that, GK. Obviously, nobody knows. Nobody knows nothing about what kind of sensory organs might be in a 6-dimensional creature, because nobody knows whether there are 6-dimensional creatures or whether there is a 6th dimension. So all we can do is we can try to do what we've always done when dealing with other dimensions, and that's look down as a way of trying to get our heads into looking up. First of all, if you believe, as I've come to believe, certainly, that that time is not a real dimension, it's a spatial dimension that we 3-dimensional beings are traveling through. So when you think about an object, this fabulous Stratosphere mug, for example, you would say that this thing has 3 dimensions. It has height, it has width, and it has depth. But that's actually not true. It actually has 4 dimensions. It has height, it has width, it has depth, and it has duration. Never thought about that until very, very recently. Isn't that cool? It's got duration. So it is actually, in fact, a 4-dimensional object. And if you were to take a look, if you could see the dimension, the 4th dimension as we travel through it, it would be, it's a dimension that's at right angles to the other 3. Now, in 3 dimensions, obviously, that's impossible. But you can almost get there, almost, by kind of almost moving yourself up and down, up out of the diagonal and looking down on a 3-dimensional world with a, you know, 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, and 3 dimensions like that. You almost take yourself back out there and imagine it. So what you have to do, I think, is you have to make a couple of assumptions. First of all, I think, without question, one of their organs would be a time organ, because since we are moving through the 4th dimension, that would be accessible to somebody who was a 6th-dimensional creature. Now, needless to say, it doesn't. We can't possibly get into what that organ would be like. Although, you know, maybe we can. There seems to be a real problem with. There we go. See you later, Linda. Bye bye. So what would this memory organ look? When we say a memory organ, it would be an eye that could see into the past and the future, which to us would simply be an eye that could see in the 4th dimension. If you take a Flatlander and you present him with a circle, he doesn't see a circle. All he sees is a line that is the diameter of the circle. He has to kind of walk around that. We know that even with 3-dimensional eyes, presumably, if we could get into the 4th dimension, you would be able to see inside of everything. Now, what that means is if you imagine a 2-dimensional world and you've got a little box and there's a little hole in the box. So it's virtually a square, but there's a little hole cut in the square. A 2-dimensional being on a Flatlander, if he's on the side of the box that doesn't have the hole in it, he doesn't see what's inside the room. Let's just call it a flat room. He has to walk all the way around. He has to get over to where the hole in the square is. He has to go inside the square in order to see what's inside the square. But because we have a 3-dimensional perspective, we're able to look down upon the square. We can see the relationship of this Flatlander to the square. We can see he's not on the side that would allow him to see in yet. We can watch him travel around and look in, but the whole time we can see all of it. We can see what's inside the building. If there's Flatlanders inside the building, we see the inside of the Flatlanders as well. Because somebody pointed out that if a Flatlander had a digestive system, it would basically fall into 2 parts, because it would separate them all the way through. So looking down on the 2nd dimension gives us a chance to get some kind of idea on what it might look like in the 6th and so on. So at least as far as 4th dimension goes, a 4-dimensional being looking down on our world would be able to see everything that we see, but they would also be able to see the inside of everything and the outside at the same time. It's kind of hard to imagine that somebody could be peering into this room and not just looking into the room. They're looking inside. They can see all of my internal organs. They can see what's inside all the cameras. They can see inside of these things because they're blocked by 3 dimensions but accessible by 4. Now, based on that series of really terrific and very interesting videos that the guy did, I think we're talking about a sensory organ for time, and then we're talking about a sensory organ that would allow him or her, hilarious, would be none of those things, that would allow such a creature to not only see time, all of it in its entirety, they would also be able to have to see alternative timelines, because if there's a sixth dimension, that means you have alternative histories and alternative timelines. So probably the closest thing I could describe to what that might look like would be, imagine you're in a huge room. Let's say you're in a Office Depot or something. You put yourself up in one of the corners of the room. Now you're looking down onto the floor of the room. You're not looking from the fourth dimension, but imagine that you were. Just take yourself up into another dimension. You're looking down on the room. You can see inside of all the people, but you don't see individual people walking around. What you see are these kind of worms where people are moving in 3 dimensions, but back and forth, like a guy guarding a security guard, back and forth. But he's not really moving back and forth. He's moving back and forth as he moves through time, through the fourth dimension. The Earth doesn't really orbit the sun. The Earth is basically in a spiral around the sun as the sun moves, and so on and so on and so on. So it's all that. Now you're looking down at all these people. You can see inside them. You can see all of these things, and you can see the worms that would represent their space through 4 dimensions. So you're in the 5th dimension, looking down on 4, so you can see all of this. Then you look over here, and off to the side is an entirely different universe, completely different, absolutely different, and there are an infinite number of them floating around. You get to look at each one of them and can examine them and so on. So if you had any kind of sensory organs in the 6th dimension, I imagine it would be something a bit like that. I think we'll give me that one, 2 to 1. Here we go.